Good morning. I hope everyone's a little cooler today than you have been for the last couple of days. My name is Ann Cuppinger. I'm with the Community Technical Assistance Center, and we are really delighted that you've all decided to join us today for our webinar. This webinar is Social Security Benefit Eligibility and Application Process, and it is designed as an information session for family and youth peer advocates. But if you're here and you are not a family or youth peer advocate, you're absolutely welcome, and we're glad you joined us. We have the great pleasure today of two presenters, Regina Schoen and Christopher Coyle, who are from the New York State Office of Mental Health, Office of Consumer Affairs. And they are a wealth of information and wisdom. And they're going to share just a little bit of all that they know with you today. So buckle up, because it's really helpful, wonderful information. I do want to reassure everyone that we will make these slides available to you, so you don't have to, try to take speed notes. Those slides will be posted on the CTAC website within a couple of days. You'll be able to access them by going to the CTAC website and navigating to a tab called Upcoming Events, where you'll find our calendar. And if you go to today's date on the event calendar, once these slides are posted and the recording of this webinar, you'll be able to access them there and download the slide deck and things like that. So while we're doing these introductions, if you can just sign in and let us know who you are and where you're from. I see we have folks even from as far away as Georgia. So welcome, Marion from Georgia. We're glad you're here. And I see folks from all over New York State, which is just terrific. Because we have, well over 300 people on this webinar, the best way for you to ask questions during the webinar is to chat them into the chat box. You can open up that chat box by clicking on the chat icon on the bottom of the screen. We may not be able to get to every question, but we'll try to get to as many of them as we can during the webinar. And we'll try to focus on questions that have broad applicability to everyone on the webinar. But Gina and Chris assure me that if we've left your question unanswered, they're providing their emails, and you can find them there in the future to get specific answers to questions that we weren't able to address. So without any more introduction, I'm going to turn it over to Gina and Chris with one more request before I do, and that is at the end of this webinar, Ravi will be sharing a link in the chat for a survey that we're going to ask you to complete about whether this webinar met your needs. You'll also have an opportunity in that form to let us know if there are any other related topics that would be helpful for us to consider covering in the future. So don't leave the webinar until you've answered that survey, please. We have an hour and a half together today, which is a little different. Sometimes we only have an hour. So we hope you can stay the whole time. If you can't, that's fine. And we'll, a lot of the question and answer will take place at the end. So hang in there with us. And we look forward to learning from you and with you. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Gina and Chris.
Good morning, everyone. And I just want to say thank you for joining us, and introduce myself and allow Chris to introduce himself. My name is Gina Schoen, and I am a statewide advocacy specialist with the Office of Consumer Affairs here in Albany. I'm also a benefits practitioner, and I've been certified to do that for, oh my gosh, probably, I think it's 15 or 16 years now. And I've been actively doing so since prior to my certification. I wasn't aware of what a benefits practitioner was, but I was doing it, which is why my boss got me certified. Chris, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Great. Thanks, Gina. And good morning, everybody. Hi, Chris Coyle with Consumer Affairs in the Office of Mental Health. I am a mental health program specialist, is my official civil service title. I'm also a family support specialist. I took the Cornell Benefits Training course in 2017. Have been doing this training with Gina for many years, well, a few years, I guess, since then. And we're very delighted to have such a big, robust crowd with us today, because I know you have a lot to kind of, digest, and you may have questions at the end that we can address. But I just want to thank everybody. I want to thank Ann for having us. And without further ado, we'll get rolling here. Thanks, everybody.
So today we're going to share with you the difference between having a disability and being eligible for Social Security benefits. Also the myths that often prevent people from utilizing benefits effectively, and the trick to getting people approved for benefits quickly. So my norm is to get people approved within between 5 days and 6 weeks. That should be everybody's norm. The longest it should take is maybe 3 months. So 90 days is the longest it should take to get anyone approved for Social Security benefits. I do want to add the caveat that throughout COVID, there have been longer delays. That's not so much to get the actual approval, that's just to get the paperwork through, because some folks at the Social Security Administration are still working remotely and they're overburdened with actual paperwork. It's not the actual approval that's taking time, it's just processing paperwork. And we also want to add that for the purposes of this training, we need to remind folks that the Social Security Administration updates their information regularly. So any numbers that are in this training and a lot of the rules and regulations need to be checked and validated regularly at the Social Security Administration's website. You can also call them to ensure their accuracy. Next slide, please. So the definition of disability, you can go right to the Social Security's website. My definition, a doctor's definition, even a lawyer's definition differ dramatically than what the Social Security's definition of disability is. And Social Security law defines disability as the inability to do any substantial gainful activity, which is work, by reason of any medically determinable physical or mental impairment, which can be expected to result in death, or which has lasted or can be expected to last for a continuous period of not less than 12 months. So if you're in school, this would be the inability to engage in meaningful activities that your peer group do, like education or extracurricular activities and relationships with your friends and family. So basically, if your physical or mental health diagnoses or impairment are going to last more than a year, and if they affect your ability to engage in work, meaningful work that gets you substantial gainful activity, or again, if you're in school and it affects your ability to engage in meaningful activities the same as your peer group, like your education, extracurricular activities, or relationships, then you have the definition of a disability per the Social Security Administration. Next slide, please. So does my disability qualify me for Social Security benefits? I want to point out that there are tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people who have a disability, and it does not disrupt their ability to live fulfilling lives. Many people with disabilities work full-time jobs, and some have never received Social Security benefits, including myself. I was told over 30 years ago that I would never work, that I, would continue in programming. The program that I was attending applied for Social Security benefits for me. And the day that I received my first check, I walked in the Social Security Administration and I returned it because I had already found full-time employment. And I just did not want to be on Social Security benefits. I had a young son to raise. And I saw it as a cycle of dependence where I couldn't give my son the things that I valued. So that's not to say that I don't believe that Social Security benefits assist many people. I do believe that they do, but they're not what I wanted. Work is my therapy for me. So it's very important that we link the disability to the inability to either learn, engage in meaningful life activities like work, or engage with your family and peers. That is the key to getting Social Security benefits. My program tried to do that for me, and then I proved my program wrong. So I was able to go to work. Yes, the presentation will be sent out and there will be a link on the website. So again, in order to have a disability that qualifies you for Social Security benefits, you have to link your disability to your inability to learn, engage in meaningful life activities like work and connecting with family and friends. And that is what gets you Social Security benefits. And work is usually the key for people between the ages of 16 and 62. Next slide, please. So myths about applying for benefits. There are many myths out there. And this is what usually either prevents people from getting benefits or working with benefits. So a big myth is that it takes a minimum of 2 years to get Social Security benefits. It should never take 2 years. It should take 30 to 90 days and no longer. So there are laws that enable lawyers to take up to 2 years to get someone their benefits. They're allowed to charge either 25% of someone's final lump sum, or $6,000, I believe, or somewhere around $6,000. And it's no surprise to know that the maximum amount that they're allowed to charge someone usually takes about 2 years to obtain. So if $941 is the maximum amount of SSI that someone in New York can receive. So if you take 25% of $941 and you multiply that exponentially, 2 years is usually the maximum amount that it would take for, the formula ends up being about 2 years. So lawyers take 2 years. The second myth is that you must hire a lawyer to get approved. You should never hire a lawyer. Federal law, again, states they can charge for 24 to 28 months or the 25% formula, and that's exactly why they take that long. Another myth, no one ever gets approved the first time they apply. If you submit the correct information in the correct way, you're always going to get approved on the first application. Another myth is that you can't work more than 10 hours a month on benefits. That's absolutely not true. You can work full-time and receive benefits. You just have to be able to utilize certain work incentives, and you could still work full-time and receive benefits. You can maintain Medicaid buy-in for working people with disabilities or Medicare buy-in for working people with disabilities. That you can't work at all while applying for benefits. Yes, you can. You can utilize work incentives like the PASS plan and protect your income and still receive benefits. That you can't save money while you're on benefits. That's another big myth. You most certainly can. There is the Achieving a Better Life Experience, or the ABLE savings plan, and you can save up to $520,000 and remain eligible for SSA benefits. After the first $100,000, you won't get the check, but you'll still maintain your eligibility. So it's very important to know that all of these are just myths, that you can have a very good quality of life and still be eligible for Social Security benefits. Next slide, please. So knowing which assistance to apply for. So there are 3 types of Social Security benefits that a person can receive. The first one is supplemental security income, that's SSI. If a person has a disability and the household has limited income and resources and their impairment will last more than a year, they're probably going to qualify for SSI. There's Social Security disability insurance. If a person has worked and met the minimum credits required per the Social Security Administration's formula. And this varies according to age and the amount that they've earned and how old they were when they started working. They may qualify for Social Security disability insurance. Now, SSDI also will cover an insured worker's spouse or their children as well in certain instances. Like the disabled adult child SSDI. If a person has a disability that was present before the age of 22 and their parent is disabled, retired, or deceased, they can draw SSDI under their parent's claim so long as their parent has paid into the SS or the Social Security system and the applicant cannot be married. So you must be the dependent child of someone who paid into the system, and they must be disabled, retired, or deceased. Next slide, please. Why is it important to know which program to apply for? There is a huge difference in the amount of money that people are going to receive from specific programs. So with SSI or a supplemental security program, the maximum federal benefit rate that the Social Security Administration is going to pay is $841 a month. That's it. So New York also is a state that pays a state supplement, and that's going to vary according to someone's living arrangement. So if you live out in the community independently, it's going to bring it up to around $941 a month. But if you live in a congregate care setting, you might get up to $634 a month. If you live, if you're a young person and you live with your family and they don't charge you rent, you could get as little as $23 a month. So there's a huge difference in the amount of money that the state supplement is going to be. But the state does pay a supplement to bump that up. $841 is barely enough to keep your head above water. SSI is a means tested program. And basically what that is it's just enough to keep people above the poverty level. That's it. Social Security disability insurance is something that people have paid into. So it's an insurance that you have paid into out of your wages, and it's based on how much you've worked and how long you've worked. People who've worked at a really good job and they had a good income and they've worked it for a really long time could receive a maximum of $3,500 per month. And people who've paid that much in and then their spouse or their child draw upon their claim, their kids could get as much as $1,553 a month. So, if I'm a young person and I have a disability that was present before the age of 22, that's a big difference of me drawing $841 a month with that $23 supplement, or me drawing $1,553 a month. So it's really important to know which program I should apply for. I will state that the Social Security Administration, or SSA, they're really good. And if they notice, hey, my mom or dad are disabled or deceased, so I might qualify for disabled adult child SSDI, they usually will slip that in and say, you actually qualify for the better program, and they'll help me apply for the correct one. Next slide, please. Eligibility criteria. So for SSI or the supplemental program, you have to meet a financial criteria and a medical criteria. Again, this is a means tested program. So if you have a lot of resources or you have a large bank account, you're not going to qualify. It's based on income and the resources of the entire household. So, if you're married and your spouse, pulls down $150,000 a year, you're not going to qualify. It's the entire household, but the household is everyone that you live with that is in your household. If it's just you and a roommate and you split the bills, that roommate is not part of your household, just so you're aware. And then the medical criteria is just yours, your individual impairment or a combination of impairments. The Social Security Administration determines the financial criteria. And then there's another agency called the Disability Determination Service, and they determine the medical criteria. So for SSDI, there's only the medical criteria because it's an insurance that you pay into. You don't meet the financial criteria. You've already paid into it, or if you're a young person, your parents already paid into it, and you don't have to meet that financial criteria. Next slide, please. So when we are applying for ourselves, or we're going to help someone else apply, it's really important to do all of our research and gather all of our information ahead of filling out the application. You want to have all the information amassed and in front of you. It's not that you can't go back and fill out the application. It's just that it is very intensive, especially if you're helping someone else fill out the application. If you are, an advocate or a care manager, and you know that the person that you're going to assist fill out the application might have trouble focusing, or might need assistance with the application, and you're just going to want to research everything ahead of time and help them gather the necessary things. So another thing that you're going to want to remember is that especially with SSI, the application is that the day that you start applying is the day that they'll go back to, but they'll only go back 1 year. So if you start an application today with someone and you keep going back and working on it and working on it and working on it, and you haven't gathered all of that information and more than a year goes by, you're going to have to restart the application. So procrastination is our enemy. And that's why I think it's super important to gather all the information, like treatment dates, who's treated them, the medications that they take, addresses and telephone numbers of where they've received treatment, the IEP from the schools that they've attended, if they received extra help, or they had an IEP at their school. Even though they may not be in school any longer, it's important to have those so that we can document that their disability goes back further than just today. So, we need to document treatments and a history of a disability, not just today I'm disabled, and then we don't need to try and link or string disabilities. So many times, we will say, well, I'll just use myself. So, oh, well, Gina has arthritis, degenerative disc disease, ADHD, Tourette's, and OCD. And we spend so much time listing a multitude of disabilities and getting records for a multitude of disabilities that we don't focus on the one disabling condition that impairs my ability to work and lead a fulfilling life. So we've provided evidence that I have 5 different disabilities, but which disability is it that is really preventing me from working or leading a fulfilling life? So and I understand that people do have multiple disabilities, but we can't spend so much time listing them that we forget to focus on the one that is, preventing them from working. And another thing that we also want to focus on is that there's a difference between a diagnosis and a disability. They are not the same. So again, I just listed 5 diagnoses, but which one's actually disabling, right? I prefer to set up a pre-application appointment to gather all of this information, like the dates of treatment, names of doctors, and I like to make sure that the individual is with me and that we have enough time set aside. I'll often print out the application, the paper application. That way we can go over it. They're aware of what information we're going to need, so that if they want to do the legwork, and I always encourage them to do the legwork because it's empowering for someone to go and gather this information themselves. And then when we submit the electronic application together, they've really, done the work, gathered the information. A lot of times I don't have time because I work with so many people. I don't have time to go out and gather the information for them. So it's empowering them to know where they have to go, what they have to do, even if they're Googling the information themselves. Next slide, please. So again, during the pre-application process, there's this form that you can download. It's the adult disability checklist. It covers a host of information that you should gather ahead of time, and a checklist of information about the applicant's medical condition and or disability. And it's really great. It's a font of information. And I sometimes will download multiple copies because, again, if I'm an advocate and I'm really busy and I have 10, 15, 20 people on my caseload, if I give the person I'm working with a copy and I say, hey, do you have, a trusted friend or family member that can assist you with this? Here's an extra copy for them. So super important to, if they want 3 copies, I'll give them 3 copies. Very important to be able to provide enough of these that they can share them with trusted individuals that can support them through the process. Next slide, please. And then the application process, I always schedule a minimum of 60 to 90 minutes and sometimes more. Again, not everyone is able to focus and just knock this out, bang, bang, bang. We have to be thorough. The more information that we include on the initial application, the less likely that the applicant is to be denied. And we also want to ensure that all of the information is accurate and true. And that's not to say that I don't trust the people that I work with, but, I just want to state that not everyone is honest, right? So sometimes people have worked under the table for years, and there are questions that are on the application that say, have you ever worked a job where you have not paid Social Security taxes? And if your name is on this application, you want to make sure that the application is accurate and true, or don't put your name on the application, because there is a spot for you to do that. Make sure that the individual is with you and that you've set aside enough time to complete the entire application. On the application, there are spots for you to click, is the person with you? Are you filling it out for yourself? Are you filling it out for someone else? At no time are you supposed to fill out an application for someone who is not with you. That is not part of how we do it. It's also legally required for every individual to have access to their application. So they must have the login and the password to their application. That is federal law. There are a lot of copies. So when you go to do an application with someone, make sure that you have access to a printer, because you will have to print a significant amount of copies. You should also always print out, several copies, especially if someone may be someone who loses things. So I always print out 2 copies, one for my record and one for their record. You're going to have cover letters, release of information. If you work for I'm sorry if I'm offending you, but a lot of people that I work with have had traumatic brain injuries or other things. And, a lot of polypharmacy, and it isn't about, and another thing I'd like to point out is that a lot of the people that I work with take public transportation or in programs where they have to hand in paperwork when they get home so that their program can review it. And through no fault of their own, for the people that I've worked with in the past, they will lose or misplace the paperwork that I give them. And it's not their fault that they lose it. It's not accusatory on my part or saying that the people that I work with lose it themselves. It's sometimes taken from them by their programs. So I'm sorry if I offend you when I say that the folks that I work with have lost it. It's through no fault of their own. So it is a programmatic requirement for them to, if it's considered legal paperwork, they have to hand it over. I have advocated against that it's their paperwork. I'm empowering them to do the paperwork themselves and, be in charge of their own things. So I'm very sorry if I offended you. That was not my intent. And I'm a peer. I am a peer and I advocate for my peers. So I'm sorry if my language offended you. Back to this, but I do always print copies. I do make sure that if someone has, for any reason, lost access or just doesn't have a copy of what they need, that I work with them and always maintain extra copies so they do have access to them. It's not about me maintaining a copy so I can correct them. It's so that they always have an extra for their own use. And that's exactly what it is. It's not about me having it. It's I always keep an extra file for the people that I serve. And the release of information. It's very, very important that if you're working with someone and you work in an agency, that you have that release of information that you've signed, because if your name's on the application, the Social Security Administration may call you and ask you questions, and they're going to ask, do you have a signed release of information sheet? And you're going to have to produce it. So it's not about your agency's policy, it's the Social Security Administration's policy. So that's something that you're going to need to know. And then, you're going to have to keep that. And the Office of Temporary and Disability Assistance, they may also ask for that. Again, it's not about your agency's policy. It's about the SSA or the OTDA policy. So just keep that. If you're just an individual who's helping someone else, you won't need that. But if you work for an agency, you would. And next slide, please. And if I'm not answering everyone's question, I just want to point out that not all of the entire questions show up if they're lengthy. Some of them are cut off, so I'm sorry. So the application process, some of the questions are really weird. If you're helping somebody who's 21 apply and you see the question that says, were you in the military prior to 1968? Be sure to answer all of the questions. They can be redundant and they're worded that way intentionally. It's going to seem like you're answering the same questions, like, what medications do you take? And then, oh, you received services at this program. What medications were prescribed at that program? Oh, you received services from, and they're going to ask you, oh, well, Dr. Smith provided services at that program. Which medications does Dr. Smith provide? Answer every single question. It's very important. These, applications were created with intent, and it's very sad to say, but they were created with the intent to weed out people with redundancy. So they save billions of dollars every year by weeding out people who get frustrated by the redundant questions. They're like, oh my God, I'm so sick of filling out the same question over and over. And they stop filling out the application. It's not complete. They don't finish it and they never receive an approval or a denial. And that's exactly why they were created this way. And, many forms are created that way. The Social Security Administration is not alone in creating frustrating and redundant applications to weed out people. The application does have space at the end for you to make remarks. I always fill it out that I have entered the data to the best of my ability. However, some dates or income may be estimated because, not everybody remembers the exact date of hire at a job that they started 15 years ago and may have worked for 3 or 4 years, or the exact date that they may have been laid off or quit or fired. So it's very important also that we say that we've estimated how much we made, because, if I started a job 28 years ago and I stopped working at 7 years ago and they want to know what my wages were, well, I'm going to estimate them because I made a variety of wages over the course of that time. So and then I always write, I've estimated my wages when requested, but I do agree with my Social Security wage data because Social Security knows exactly what I've made over the course of the last 15 years. And they always ask, well, we want your last 5 jobs. Well, my last 5 jobs covers more than 15 years. And, it's a very, again, intensive application. And depending on who you're assisting and filling out this application, they may not have worked at all. They may have worked 1 or 2 jobs. They may have worked the whole 5 jobs, and it may cover a tremendous amount of time. So again, I always put in those caveats, and you yourself may enter a remark at the end, like, I've helped them to the best of my ability. Does Social Security calculate the highest wages of the last 3 to 5 years? So they calculate it differently for everyone. It varies depending on how old you were when you were born, and how many years you've worked, but you can get that information and the different calculations just by going to the Social Security website and Googling it. It does vary according to when you were born and when you started to work. Next slide, please. So the application will ask when your symptoms started and when the symptoms began to affect work or activities. And this really is super important. So I may have missed work or school for a year due to my disability before I decided to apply for Social Security benefits. So I will use myself as an example, and I'll be very transparent. I have Tourette's. I've had Tourette's as long as I can remember, probably 7 or 8 when it began to affect, my life. And now, as an adult, I have a lot of nerve damage, specifically in my neck and spine. And now I have, like a lot of occipital neuralgia and a lot of pain and, just degeneration. So, they're obviously not going to give me like Social Security disability for something that they can't see. And I would go back to when my symptoms began to affect me, which be like 6 years ago, but it wasn't disabling back then. So if my condition becomes disabling, say 8 years from now, I'm going to start diagnosing when my symptoms began to affect my work or activities, which was 6 years ago, I'd say 2016. And then when my disability began to affect my ability to work, that would be, whenever in the future. So it's really important that, we say to folks, hey, Gina, when did your symptoms begin to really affect your work or activities, as opposed to now that you can't work at all. Now, the Social Security Administration won't go 20 years back. I want to stress that. They're not going to go 20 years back. They have a minimum amount of time or a maximum amount of time that they will go back. But we want to be able to document that you made a good faith effort, right? Even though it's affected me and I've gotten really good treatment over the course of the years, you want to document that it has affected me and I continued to work, or it has affected me and I went to the doctor. So we're going to be able to document it. And then the Social Security Administration may decide that your disability actually began at the start of whichever year, the year that I applied or the year that my disability began to affect me. And it would increase the amount of time that they're willing to pay you. So for SSI, that's a full year. But for Social Security disability, it could be much longer. Another good thing to remember is don't exit the page immediately upon submitting the application, because there are many pages to download and print. And you're going to receive a lot of prompts that state that you're done, and they'll close the page. So you want to ensure that you've submitted the application by printing the confirmation page, and you're going to get a copy of a receipt. That's when you will close. It'll say you are now okay to close this page. Very important. You don't want to lose those pages that you're going to print. Next slide, please. You have to download, print, and mail in the cover letter and a signed copy of the release of information sheet. Sometimes the Social Security Administration will also give you other requests, so you have to read everything. If you have medical records in your possession, send them in. I will say that all medical records are supposed to come directly from the source. That's very important to know, because if you go to your doctor and you get your records and then you mail them in, they can't accept them. But if you already have old records from years ago, like for instance, somebody who's in the military, a lot of people don't know this if you're not involved with people in the military. If I'm in the military, it's my responsibility to collect and gather all of my records. If I break my leg and I go to the orthopedic surgeon hands me my record, and it's my responsibility to maintain that. So if I'm in the military 8 years, my medical record's this thick and I have to maintain it. The military doesn't keep a copy of it. So if I'm in the military and then I get out and now I'm applying for Social Security, they'll accept my military medical record from me, because they know as a military member, it's my responsibility to maintain my medical record in the military. So that's that type of medical record they will accept. So shortly after you submit the application and you mail in the cover letter and the release of information, the Social Security Administration will mail a letter to you if you're applying for yourself or the person that you've assisted, and they'll acknowledge the receipt of your application. And within 7 to 10 days, they're going to arrange a telephone interview. It's really important to know that the person that is being applied for must participate in that interview. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. So if they have submitted, their cell phone or, mom or dad's telephone number or, a next door neighbor's telephone number, that's the phone number that they're going to get called at. So if you give your office number, they're going to call that office number. So always use a number that the person has access to, and stress that they absolutely have to answer that number and they must participate in that telephone interview. Then later on, you both may receive a packet containing questions about symptoms and work history, and they both must be completed and returned within 10 days. So only one of them has to be completed, not both. And be sure that it is filled out accurately and completely. So if the person that you're assisting decides that they're going to fill it out, stress to them that it really needs to be filled out completely. You know, if they're capable of doing it on their own, and I don't say that in a disparaging way, that's fine. They can fill it out on their own. But normally if somebody comes to me for assistance with their application, it's because they need assistance filling out their application. So I always offer assistance filling out the packet. So the questions about their symptoms and work history are: how long can you stand up? How long can you sit down? How long can you work? You know, are you able to care for yourself? Can you cook? Can you clean? Can you dress yourself? How does your disability affect your ability to interact with friends and family? And it's a very long, thick packet to be answered. And it's time limited as well. You only have a very short time period to turn it in. Next slide, please. So evidence. The Social Security Administration first examines the evidence that an individual submits to determine if they have a disability. That's what the whole point of the application is. If we submit enough evidence and the correct evidence in a timely manner, then chances are that it's never going to go to an appeal, right? So it's also important to know that Social Security, all that the Social Security examiners do is decide which program you're eligible for, SSI or SSDI, and if you meet the means test, you know. So are you disabled? Like, do you actually have the definition of a disability? And then the Disability Determination Service is the one who really decides if your diagnosis qualifies as a disability. So Social Security decides, do you qualify for SSI or SSDI? And then Disability Determination Service looks at the evidence. So if you're applying for Social Security benefits because you have a learning disability, you don't want to submit evidence from your dentist, right? So you should submit evidence from schools, tutors, neurologists, or even psychologists. And it's important to remember too, that it only takes a single disability to get approved for Social Security benefits, regardless of the number of diagnoses. So we want to focus on the one disabling condition or impairment. So again, if you're applying because you have a disabling learning disability that is preventing you from training for a job, or you know, you have disabling arthritis or a disabling heart condition, that's what we want to submit our evidence from. We don't want to submit evidence about, you know, from your dentist or your gynecologist. And this is, I'll share this example. I was helping a woman who had bipolar disorder, and it had been severe, and she had received Social Security for it in the past. And then she had worked her way off of Social Security with the use of a PASS plan, and had worked for probably 30 years. And then she got spinal stenosis so bad that it was crippling, and she had spinal surgery, and the fusion didn't work, and she was now just completely crippled. And so she came to me for assistance to reapply for Social Security, because she just could not work anymore. And now she's in her 50s. So I helped her with her application, and, you know, we got all of her evidence submitted, and we sent records requests to her primary care physician, to her psychiatrist, because, you know, it was causing her to be depressed. Not that her bipolar disorder was acting up. She was going for counseling with her depression, and she had, you know, gotten boosts for her antidepressant because she missed work and was in a lot of pain. And then all of the specialists that she went to for her spinal stenosis, her surgeon, the physical therapist, the OT doctor, all of these doctors. So then she got a letter from Social Security that said that the only doctor who had sent back records to date was her primary care physician. and one other doctor that they didn't list. So when you are applying for Social Security, sometimes the Social Security Department will say, you're not allowed to look at your records. You must appoint a representative. So I went in, she appointed me. I went in, made an appointment and looked at her records. The only record that her primary care physician had sent in was the most recent note about her, like, I'm drawing a blank here. So like her healthy woman checkup. You know, like that had absolutely nothing to do with her spinal stenosis. Her primary care physician could have sent in a note about, I referred Mrs. Smith to a spinal specialist. I referred her for pain management. I referred her for anything that was related to all these tests she had done, you know, an MRI, a CAT scan. All that doctor had sent in was her healthy wellness, you know, her healthy female wellness checkup. And it was just not at all related to the disability that we were applying for. And the other doctor who had sent something in was her psychiatrist. So I'll answer that question in just a second. So it's really important that if you get that letter from the Social Security Department that says, you know, where we have not gotten enough evidence, that you then go back to all of the doctors and you say, listen, you know, I'm unable to work. I really need these records returned in a timely manner. But what I like to do is I go to the records people directly. I bring a stamped addressed envelope. I'm very polite. I like to call it Toll House and a smile. And I bring them some cookies on a dollar store platter. And I make good relationships with these folks because they have crappy jobs. And, you know, I tell them, this is what I need. I need a note about my surgery. I need the most recent note about my surgery and the worst note about my surgery. And I give them the envelope that's addressed to the Social Security Administration. I take the worst part of their work out of their work. So all they have to do is go get that note and stick it in the envelope. And then I go put it in the mail for them. So it's come directly from them. And that's it. It's done. All they got to do is go grab the note and print it for me. That's it. And 90% of their work is done. And they got a cookie out of it. So the reason that the Social Security Administration sometimes prevents us from looking at our records is that they feel, and a lot of facilities are the same way. They feel that sometimes some things that we look at can be detrimental to our mental or physical health. Right. So if I have, you know, schizoaffective disorder, I'm bipolar, and I'm applying for Social Security benefits, and my doctor sends in a particularly nasty note about me, they don't want me to see how nasty my doctor can be about me. Or what if my doctor who worked on me for spinal stenosis says, I think Gina's just lazy and she could probably train to go work in an office. As long as she was sitting down, she could probably learn how to type. She just doesn't want to work. It doesn't matter that Gina might be 58 years old and all she's done her whole life is be a cook. Now he wants me to go learn to sit in an office and type. And he may not know that I might be dyslexic or I might have ADHD and I find it hard to focus. And that's why I was always a cook, because I was doing something different all the time. He's just judgmental, knows that I have a mental health diagnosis and just says, I did surgery for spinal stenosis, but she could learn how to be a secretary. So no, I can disclose the information to anyone I want, but the Social Security Administration just doesn't want something they find might be detrimental to me, probably because they're afraid I'll freak out in their office if I go see it myself and they don't know how to deal with me. But at any rate, that's the rule. That's how it is. If they don't think that it would be detrimental to me, they'll let me go look at it. But if they think it would be detrimental to me, they won't let me go look at it. And that's why. But again, always build good relationships. I had great relationships with people and I always got good records. It took me a while. It's not something that happens overnight. Next slide, please. All evidence must come directly from the source. So we go directly to the providers. And So this next thing, the statement of claimant or other person form, they are considered evidence and must be mailed directly from individuals. I cannot stress how very, very important the statement of claimant or other person form is. Anyone can fill out a statement of claimant or other person form. So your mom, your dad, your best friend, your husband, your mailman, your pharmacist, literally anyone can fill out a statement of claimant or other person form. But I want to stress that in my experience, and I've been doing this for almost 20 years, sometimes you hand a statement of claimant form to people, especially family members, and they say, and this is how my mom would fill it out. So Gina is such a hard worker. Gina has had 8 jobs in 5 years, and she is just a go-getter. She's just work, and she will do anything for work. It doesn't matter what it is. She just wants to have a job, and she loves people. Like, she'll talk to anybody. Gina is just a hard worker, and she's a great gal. And that would be my grandmother's, or my mother's statement of claimant form for me. But then if you were to give a statement of claimant form to my best friend would say, Gina really wants to work, and she has tried to work 8 different jobs in 5 years. But the reality is that Gina's mental health diagnosis prevents her from focusing in any meaningful way. She cannot keep a job, although she goes out and continues to try and get a job. She doesn't have appropriate interactions with people at work. She can't focus on her activities of daily living, and this causes her to, lose jobs. My best friend would fill it out in an appropriate way, where my mother would focus only on the positive. So the statement of claimant or other persons forms should be used in such a way that our people who know us can share their opinion on how our disability affects our ability to interact with people, perform our activities of daily living, how our disability affects our everyday lives or our ability to work. And, that's why I think it's important that, and I can share appropriate examples as well. So I have one that I use Cleveland from the Family Guy talking about Peter Griffin, and you can even Google examples online, but it's really important that people just really stress not on the positive of people, but on the reality of people. So it's very important. Next slide, please. So existence of an impairment. By law, the Social Security Administration needs specific medical evidence to establish that someone has an impairment. So we need to go out and get that medical evidence, and it has to be objective. So an acceptable medical source is the terminology that they use. So you can't just use any old plain, PA or nurse practitioner. If you're applying for a psychiatric diagnosis, it has to be a psychiatric nurse practitioner. You wouldn't go to a podiatrist to get treatment for an ear infection. So they all have to be related to the diagnosis that you're going for, right? And they need to see evidence that assesses the severity of your disorder as well. So, you can't just go and have the urgent care submit their note. You actually have to get treatment for whatever your disability is. And then the Social Security Administration will again determine the extent and the kinds of evidence that they need, both medical and non-medical sources, based on the facts about your disorder. So all of the correspondence is going to come. They're always going to tell you, I need more. You didn't give me enough. This is what I need. So it's really important that you or the person you're applying with reads every single piece of mail from the Social Security Administration, and everything is time limited. Up in the right-hand corner of your letter from the Social Security Administration, it's going to say, you must respond by August 30th, September 5th. And if you don't, then, you're going to be denied. That's just how it works. And another fun fact that everybody should know is that you need to keep every single letter you ever receive from the Social Security Administration. And especially if you're going to work while receiving benefits, I suggest that people keep those letters always. Just get an accordion file and never get rid of those letters. That's super important. And right from the get-go, when you apply with people, educate them. Keep a notebook, write down who you speak with on the phone, their name, what you spoke about, and keep every letter in a file and don't get rid of them. It's very, very important. Next slide, please. So the severity. And again, these are all the things that they evaluate. They want to know how severe your disorder or your impairment is. So again, the evidence must come from medical and non-medical sources. And they want to know how severe it is. How does it affect your ability to function in a work setting? Or in case of a child, your ability to function in school or with your peers. Non-medical sources, again, that could be teachers, family members, educational personnel. It could also be caregivers, families, friends, employers, the mailman, your priest. That could be the statement of claimant form that we talked about. But again, do you want them to talk about how severe the impairment is and how it affects day-to-day function, your ability to interact with other people and enjoy time with your peers? Next slide. The claimant's responsibilities. The claimant must always inform the Social Security Administration about or submit evidence known to them, how it relates to everything. Like, it's your duty to keep them informed if you move, if you get new evidence, if you end up hospitalized, if your situation changes, right? So again, I'll use myself. If I say I'm disabled because of spinal stenosis, what if I suddenly become paralyzed on my right side? It's my responsibility to submit more evidence. Guess what? Now I am, paralyzed on my right side. Or what if I suddenly get better? Hey, I had this groundbreaking surgery and they fixed my spine. I have to let them know. But it was groundbreaking surgery and it's a pilot project. I don't know. I could become, paralyzed on my right side. It's a side effect we have to see. So always report the nature and severity of the impairments, how long we've experienced the impairments, and whether we can still do any work-related physical or mental activity with the impairments. Submit all the evidence and the detail about these things. Next slide, please. In developing evidence of the effects of symptoms like pain, shortness of breath, fatigue, the Social Security Administration always investigates all avenues presented that relate to the complaints. So they're going to want to know in that big form that I told you that you're going to get, or they will get to fill out, they want to know about activities of daily living, location, duration, frequency, and intensity of pain or other symptoms, what started the pain or, precipitated or aggravating factors, what causes them. They want to know type, dosage, effectiveness, and side effect of any medications, any treatments you've had, medications you've had, whether they work or not. So did you have side effects? Any measures that you've taken or used to relieve pain or side effects or pain or symptoms. So, even if it's a mental health diagnosis, what have you done? What has worked? What hasn't worked? Did you do therapy? Have you tried day treatments? Have you tried programs? Have you gone to a pros? Flower essences. They just want to know every single thing that someone has tried. And are there other factors concerning your functional limitations due to pain or other symptoms? Do you have trauma triggers? Like were you, were you attacked at work once and that's what caused all of your trauma? Are you, unable to ride the subway or take a bus? They want to know everything related to your disorder and how it affects your ability to interact, not just at work, but in your daily life. And then in assessing the claimant's pain or other symptoms, they will consider all of the above mentioned factors. And that's why it's so important to mention anything that is going to affect your day-to-day life or work, and to provide any medical source that addresses those factors. So, hey, I have spinal stenosis and that's what I'm using for my disability, but I also go to therapy to deal with the depression that is caused by my pain and the fact that I've lost the mobility to go out and do my day-to-day things. So I'm applying for my spinal stenosis, but I also get therapy to deal with other things. So you could tie those two things in. Next slide, please. Medical source evidence. So again, we don't want to bombard them with needless things. I wouldn't tell them about my podiatrist or my dentist unless they were directly related to my spinal stenosis. But since I do get therapy to deal with my depression related to my spinal stenosis, I would talk about that. So evidence from medical sources, they will consider all relevant. Now, these are their words. A lot of this is copy and pasted. Relevant medical evidence about your disorder from your physician, psychologist, or other medical sources. So they want things that are related to your reported symptoms, your medical, psychiatric, or psychological history. I'm not going to go down through all these in the interest of time, but everything always must be tied to the diagnosis that you are referring to as a disability. Those are the things that are so very important. Tying the disability and all of your evidence back to that. That's what you have to remember, and how it affects your ability to function and earn substantial gainful activity or interact with your peer group and family and friends. And how long you think it's going to last, because that's the other thing. It must last 12 months or longer or result in death. Super important to know. Next slide. And this one's really important too, and I've referenced it already. So acceptable medical sources, a licensed physician, a licensed psychologist, license. And again, if you're going to use a licensed practical nurse, it must be a psychiatric nurse practitioner, or a licensed physician assistant. It must be a psychiatric PA if you're applying for mental impairments. So, and again, if you send in records for a qualified speech language pathologist, it can only be if you are applying for speech and language impairments. And if you send in podiatrist records, it's only if you're applying for impairments of the foot. So they're very, they don't want your podiatrist records if you're not applying for specific things. So yeah, if you send in records from your social worker, as long as they're relevant to the disability, the disabling condition. So yeah, I've had social workers fill out the statement of claimant form. So, and the thing with social workers too is always have them check with their agency. So some agencies are great and they say, sure, the social worker can write a letter. Other agencies are like, no, they have to send in the request for information, and all we send in is the most recent progress note. Social workers aren't allowed to send in a letter. They're not allowed to send in a note. It varies from agency to agency. If you are a social worker, check with your agency. I would hate to have you risk your retirement and job to do something that I'm telling you to do in a training. Check with the policy at your agency. So it varies. Always follow the policy at your agency. Next slide, please. Non-medical evidence. Again, this is evidence from you and people you know. At the end of every application, there is that open statement part, and where I said I always suggest that you write, dates and amounts of earnings were estimated. People can put their own statement in there, and if folks want to pop in and say, whatever they want their personal statement to be, they're allowed to make a personal statement there. And I've often had people make personal statements there. So they can do that. I've often had people sign their own statement of claimant forms and make a statement or write a letter to the Social Security Administration and attach it to a statement of claimant because they weren't sure if they could fill out a statement of claimant. So people can submit their own evidence in the form of a letter or statement of claimant or other person. A lot of people, my rule of thumb is the weight of the evidence. So a minimum of 30 statement of claimant forms. People often say, well, I don't know 30 people. Get as many as you can, and they need to be mailed in individually. And all of those statements need to be relevant to the disorder or the disabling condition that they're applying for. The Social Security will consider all that evidence, but they're going to ask about the symptoms, their daily functioning, their medical treatment, and they're going to ask for information from third parties who can tell them about their disorders as well. And they always do say, you know, hey, if they feel like they haven't gotten enough evidence, they'll say, you know, do you work with anyone else who can tell us? And sometimes they will come right out and say, you know, I see that you receive services here, there, the next place, and who would you prefer that we speak to there? You know, who did you work best with there? And they'll seek that out. So that's good to know. And maybe they could go to those places and get the statement of claimants there. I've always gathered the claimant statements and mailed them together. No, they don't accept them if they're mailed together. They actually get thrown away. So they have to go in separately, and they need to be mailed by the person who filled them out. So if you get envelopes and put a stamp on it and mail them in individually, if they're all addressed by, you know, you, the return address should be filled out by the person who filled it out. Like you could put the Social Security Department 123 Mockingbird Lane, Albany, New York, blah, blah, blah. But have the return address filled out by the person who actually filled out the statement of claimant. If you mailed 20 statement of claimants in one envelope, they all got thrown away. And that's unfortunate. Next slide, please. So this is the statement of claimant that I filled out like I was Cleveland Brown, and I filled it out for Peter Griffin. Again, I'm not going to read it in the interest of time, but these slides are going to be sent out, and there will be a link to them. So you guys will have access to it. And, you know, I think it's pretty tactful considering who it's filled out about. And I think you guys will get the gist of how they should be filled out. And, yeah, I can't, if somebody could forward it to the next slide, because I can't see the buttons. So non-medical evidence. This could be from schools, vocational training, work, non-related or work-related programs. If you may have recently attended or maybe attending school, even if you haven't recently attended school, like, you know, you could be 27, 28 years old, but if you, you know, had an IEP or Section 504 plan, any evaluations, if you got therapy in school, it's extremely, extremely important to, again, document back as far as you can. So if you got those extra supports in school, or the person that you're working with did, go ahead and try and get the vote, or yeah, the plans from the school, so that, you know, you can show a history of, you know, disability or supports that were received. Next slide, please. Evidence from vocational training, work and work-related programs. So if somebody needs, you know, extra help around work, and, you know, they have a job coach or something, and that's been ongoing, you know, we could get statements from those folks, even just submitting that they do receive those supports at work or any work-related programs, that should be enough. But a statement of claimant form, that would be great. If it's not a formal vocational training program like Access VR or something. So those are really great to have and submit as evidence. Do we need to resend all evidence and claimant statements when a person is reevaluated? You know, a good rule of thumb is to inquire with the Social Security Administration, because I'm not familiar with your individual case. Next slide, please. Longitudinal evidence. So again, longitudinal medical evidence is really good to have. So again, if somebody, you know, like I said, I can trace my Tourette's back to childhood and the physical manifestation of all the nerve damage in my neck from my tics from my Tourette's that began like 6 years ago. And I have all of my medical evidence to back that up. So it's all longitudinal, and I can show that for the future when this has been going on. It's really important for a lot of people to go back and document as far back as they can, and non-medical sources of longitudinal evidence. Have people been chronically homeless? Have they gone and sought help from like mental health programs and then stop going? Did they go and get therapy and then maybe go years without therapy? They maybe go and get help from a medical practitioner and receive medication from them for mental health diagnoses, and then not go to say a traditional mental health practitioner. So if we can show evidence that over the course of time people have received supports but not in traditional ways, that's still going to show that people have received treatment, just not in a normal way that the Social Security Administration would have traditionally looked for. So what about non-medical evidence for people whose mental health conditions affect their relationships? That's exactly what the statement of claimant forms are for. So say that the ACT team is somebody, or maybe the MIT team is the only one that they'll interact with. What if they only go and get help from the Salvation Army, and they've literally been to that soup kitchen for 20 years and they're the only ones that they will interact with? Go to the Salvation Army and have those folks fill out the statement of claimant forms and have them say, listen, we've had a really great working relationship with Mr. Smith for 20 years. He helps us ring our bell. We feed him. We give him clothes when he needs them. We've encouraged him to move in off the streets. We get him help and time into resources when he asks for them. They're a wonderful resource. So, whoever the supports for people are, those are the people that we want to get and fill out the statement of claimant. I'll give you a really good example. I was a peer supportive case manager for many years, and I had a gentleman who had been stable in the community for many, many years. He lived in his apartment, and me and his mother were about the only people that he ever touched base with. And 2 or 3 times a month, I'd go out and check on him. I'd take him to get groceries, whatever he needed to do. He was very independent. And for 6-7 weeks in a row, I could not find this gentleman. And I combed his city, combed it. I went to his mental health provider. I went to the grocery store that I would take him to. His mom and I could not find him. He had not called either of us. And I went and I picked up one of my other folks, and I had taken her to the drugstore. She was off shopping, and I found this little cove over near the pharmacy, and I called my director, and I was just lamenting. I did not say the gentleman's last name. I said, it's first time I can't find him. I'm worried. It's been 7 weeks. Can I call and make a missing persons report? And then the pharmacist caught my eye and said, I need to speak with you. So when I hung up with my boss, I went over and I thought the pharmacist was going to talk to me about the lady I had brought there. And he said to me, are you talking about, I'll call him John. Are you talking about John Smith? I said, well, I'm not allowed to confirm or deny that. And he said, he's in the mental health unit 1 town over. He's on a very, he's on a medication that they don't stock. And I've been sending the meds there. And he said, he's usually in here once a week and we have lunch together when he comes to get his medication. Of all of the supports in the community that I had expected this gentleman to make, I did not expect him to have lunch with his pharmacist. So we don't always expect people to have these non-traditional supports. And here's this man, I thought me and his mother were his only support. He's having lunch with his pharmacist once a week because he has such a good relationship with him. Get those statement of claimant forms from anybody, anyone in the world you can. Like I said, the mailman, the pharmacist, sometimes they really work out good. Next slide, please.
Gina, this is Ann, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I just want to figure out what's the best way to spend the remaining time that we have, because you have so much information and we have so many questions. And I just, I don't want people to end up feeling, like we're leaving them hanging. So, and, I'm not expecting you to address all of these questions.
Yeah.
But I noticed that I want to say a couple things. First of all, for those of you who have questions about children under 18, we've already had a conversation with Regina and Chris about possibly doing a webinar that really focuses on benefits for young people under age 18, because that's a whole different process, right? So that is coming. I suspect we could also figure out a way to do something very specifically on PASS, ABLE, and the whole work with benefits, and get a little bit more detailed information on that in some fashion, because I see a lot of questions about how do those things all work together. So I noticed that Chris has posted in the chat, I just want to draw people's attention to it, some information on ABLE accounts and the student earned income exclusion. So I just wanted to, because I know you're trying to talk and answer questions and look at the chat at the same time, Gina. So I just want you to think a little bit about how is best to get us to some of the questions, but given the information that you still want to talk about. So that's all.
Yeah. And I apologize.
That's not a problem.
Really overloaded this. So why don't we, I don't know. What do you think, Chris?
Well, I was just going to say, Gina, I don't want to interrupt your flow. Like, there's a ton of questions coming in that jives with everything you're talking about.
Okay.
I did put in the websites for ABLE and for the student earned income exclusion. We can, table that, and I can come back and do another one of these. In addition to some of the other work incentives, we can do that. I want to address the questions, if you're okay with that, Gina, because I know that there's a ton in there that kind of coincide with what you're talking about. So if you're okay with that.
Yeah. So why don't you, you've been keeping track of the questions, Chris, or?
No, I actually had to minimize it because it kept populating in my field of vision here.
Yeah.
But I think Ann and team have.
Okay.
I have been, and I think we'll have to, sort of treat this a little bit like speed dating, and we will not get to all the questions. And, both Gina and Chris have been very generous. Their email is at the end of the slide deck, and they've offered to respond to your questions, if they don't get answered here today. One of the questions I do want to put out there, because I think it will be helpful to folks, is, in addition to emailing you, Gina, and you, Chris, what is the best way for someone to get help with this process? There was a question about if, case managers can help them, or where's the best place to go for somebody who can really provide the right kind of guidance? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I'll be completely truthful that there is no particular resource that I am aware of that focuses on applying for Social Security benefits. So there are benefits and work incentive navigators. There are community work incentive coordinators, and they are trained through Cornell University and Virginia Commonwealth University. They focus on assisting people who already receive Social Security benefits to return to work. Most people who work in benefits are folks that are trained to help people that already are on benefits. That's why Chris and I go and assist people to learn how to obtain benefits for folks quickly.
Right. So I'm going to focus right now. I'm going to prioritize the questions about obtaining benefits, and we'll based on your questions today and what Chris and Gina are able to do, and maybe what some other people could come on to do, we'll plan on doing some additional sessions in the future. But so here's a question. I'm going to sort of just focus on, this application. So someone's asking, how early can you make an appointment for a disabled child who's turning 18 to apply for benefits as a disabled adult? Can you start before they turn 18?
Yeah.
Okay.
But keep in mind, they must have a parent who is disabled, retired, or deceased.
So that's to apply for adult child with a disability benefits, correct?
Yes.
Right. So I think this person's asking, what about the child themselves? If they're, you know, a child with a disability who is 17 and they're about to turn 18, how do they make that transition from children's benefits to adult benefits?
It's seamless.
Okay. So
yeah.
SSI will sort of assist them with that process. It just,
It's so if a parent is disabled, retired, or deceased,
right.
and the child receives SSDI because their parent is disabled, retired, or deceased, they're already receiving childhood benefits. So when they turn, if they have a disability and it's just not going to stop. It's just going to continue. It'll just transition to disabled adult child from childhood benefits. And the Social Security Administration will transition it for them. If they're already receiving childhood benefits, but if they're on SSI, then chances are they're not going to qualify. They don't qualify for disabled adult child benefits because their parent isn't disabled, retired, or deceased.
Right. So I think when we do something with children, we'll talk about the difference between a child who has benefits, SSI benefits, versus a child who has SSDI benefits, because that is a slightly different process.
Yes.
Do adult children need to live with parents to qualify for adult disabled benefits if the parents are still alive? Do they have to live with their parents, or can they live independently?
They can live independently. The only requirement is that they are not married, so they must be a dependent.
Okay. There are several questions about substantial gainful activity for SSDI versus SSI, and what actually counts as substantial gainful activity. Is that such a big topic that we should take it up separately, or do you feel like you could address that here?
And what was the question again?
The question is about what kind of money counts as income. So obviously regular income counts, but what about bonuses and work stipends, any other kinds of revenue that an individual might get? Which of those count toward, as income, or is it just their regular salary that counts?
No, there's a lot more than just someone's regular salary. Even gifts from family members can count. Okay. So there is earned income, and then there's unearned income, and it depends on which. It really depends on which benefit someone's receiving. If it's SSI or SSDI, on the resources that you're allowed to have. It can be very complicated and convoluted. So I would, say that, number one, Google is everyone's friend, right? So if you're receiving a stipend, or, you're going to get a bonus, is definitely going to count as income, because that's from your job. It's income. Okay. But always reach out.
I think that's a good point. There's probably SSA probably puts out a list that we can either link folks to, or that you can Google, that will actually specify exactly what counts there.
Yeah.
So a couple questions about how a person, an advocate, for example, would support someone who has, limited ability to participate in the process, or maybe physically unable to sign, or who is nonverbal when that call comes in from SSA. What kinds of accommodations are made and allowed for in those situations?
My advice would be, if they are applying for somebody who is nonverbal and can't sign, that they make an appointment and let Social Security do the application, because that is also an option. So you can call Social Security and say, I'm assisting an individual who is nonverbal, or somebody who can't sign. But if you're assisting someone who is nonverbal and can't sign, and I would make the appointment with Social Security.
Okay, great. How about if a client receives SSI and wants to apply for SSDI? Is it an entirely new application required with all new medical records, or is that a
So if somebody receives SSI, I don't know that they could apply for SSDI, because if they could apply for SSDI, they would automatically transition to SSDI. Social Security knows when you qualify for SSDI. In order to transition from SSI to SSDI, you would have to have worked enough to have earned enough credits, and then they would transition you over. Or the opposite would be that your parent, you would be unmarried and your parent would be deceased, retired, or disabled, and then you would let them know, I think I qualify for disabled adult child SSDI. Or you might have been married and your spouse, but if you're married and your spouse has worked enough credits, then you probably wouldn't qualify for SSI.
Yeah. Okay. Just a couple other kind of technical application questions that I'll take on here. There's a question about electronic signatures. For are those allowed during the process? I think these are questions that we'd probably want to refer to the specific applications to get that information. Trying to sort through. Sorry, we have so many questions here. Someone wants to confirm that the client should not submit medical evidence at the time of mailing the application and the cover letter, that the medical provider should mail this separately. And I believe your answer was that it's only if they have military records.
Right.
That they,
all medical evidence should always come from the source.
Okay. Someone's asking now, with changes in the New York State law where LMHCs can have a broader scope of practice, can they complete the part of the that part of the application? And my sense is that they would be able to, but that we would need to check with Social Security. There may be a lag in their list of who qualifies as a licensed practitioner. And so that's something that we want to check with Social Security about, but I bet that will follow with that change in New York State law. I see a lot of other questions about what information needs to be kept, what documentation needs to be kept, and I think I might be able to summarize your advice, Gina, in that you should basically keep everything. Hold on to everything, and read all those emails, even if they look or those letters that you get, that even though they look bureaucratic, keep it in a file, keep it organized, read it, and if you ever have any questions, start making some phone calls. We have a lot of questions that are still left here, and I'm going to promise everyone that we're going to organize those, think about which ones could be addressed in perhaps a future webinar, and also invite you to email Gina and Chris individually if there's a question that you have that you think they may be able to shed some light on. I also would like to ask everyone to click on the link that Ragini is going to post in the chat, so that you can complete the evaluation form for today's session. We will also go through this chat and include with the slides that we post some of the information that has been posted in the chat, so you don't need to rush back through and copy links and things like that. We'll be sure to include those for you. And with that, I want to really extend a big thank you to both Chris and Gina, and to our partners at Families Together who are here on this webinar, who helped us, really conceptualize this idea. And I'm going to let everybody go because we've reached the hour. But I promise you we will be back, and we will do our best to get you the information that you need. And I hope everyone has a lovely afternoon. Thank you all so much.